I'm going to talk you through what we did at the end of year 10, which was B7 for ecology. So at the moment in year 11, we're doing B6, that's inheritance. That's not going to come up on the mock paper because we haven't finished it yet. So the two things that you're going to get asked about are B5, which is homeostasis, which I'm going to send you another link to, and B7. This is the one that you did the longest ago. So this one was year 10, whereas B5 we did at the start of year 11. So this is the book that you would have been given last year. The first lesson you can see here is talking about organisms and their environment. So this is talking about all of the different living things and the way that they interact. So if I just go over to this page here, so this is like the online textbook. You can see there, it just talks you through what they are, what it's about. It's basically an introduction to the topic. But there are some key words from here that you need to learn. So the best way I think you can find to explain these is, this image is a bit blurry, but this is one that I think is really good. So if you're asked about an individual, that is just one organism. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a plant. It could be like an animal. A population is only referring to one species. So you can see in this picture alone, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fish. So that is the population of fish. It doesn't include anything else that is living, just the fish. When we're talking about the community, if you think about living within a community, you're talking about different ages, different races, you know, your neighbours, etc. What we're talking about here is all of the living things. So it's made up of multiple different populations. That can be plants, animals, etc. When we go down to our ecosystem, the difference here is that it includes the non-living. So you know, it's no longer just talking about the different populations. We've got fish, we've got jellyfish, we've got plants, but you've also got non-living factors. And I'm going to remind you about those in a second. So you can see there's a rock, there'll be the amount of shade, there'll be the light levels that are reaching the organisms below. We've got the water, whether or not it's salty or it's got a low pH, whether it's clear, you know, all of those different things. That's as far as that as you need to go for your GCSEs. So talking here about communities within an ecosystem, and the whole emphasis is on this word here, interdependence. Interdependence is talking about other organisms and how they interact. So you can see the bullet points over here. Nothing survives on its own. So you do have some species that like to live solitary lives, so they're completely on their own. So like types of like a snow leopard, it will have babies. Once the babies are old enough, or once the one cub is old enough, it will go its separate way, so it lives totally on its own until it wants to find a mate. That might be the case. It doesn't live in like a community. However, it needs to rely on other organisms for food, perhaps for shelter. So some of the examples you are given here. Plants produce food by photosynthesis, and we know that goes up the food chain. Animals eat plants. Animals will pollinate other plants. We're going to come back to that in a second. So you can see there something like a bumblebee or an insect. Animals eat other animals. Animals use plants and other animals to build nests and shelters. So I'm trying to think, like you might have, I don't know, bacteria. I know it's not exactly an animal, but you know what I mean, living on an organism, on an animal. You have monkeys living in trees. Those are living organisms. We still, you know, build a lot of our houses using wood primarily, and, you know, wooden floors, things like that. Our furniture is made from wood. So again, we're relying on other organisms. Plants need nutrients from animal droppings and decay. So again, just another example. So nothing survives on its own. The next bit here is talking about stable communities, and this really bothers me because it came up in an end of topic test that I did with one of my groups recently, and it came up as a 2 marker on what the definition is. So there's so much that it basically encompasses. I'm going to just go up. You can see here I've got the definition that I'm going to show you in a second. So a stable community is something that has taken absolutely years to establish. So we're not talking about, you know, outside, if you look in your garden, you've got grass. It's things like rainforests. It's any woodlands. So we might have, you can see there, an oak woodland. So you could have a pine forest. We often refer to them as like the name of one species, but actually there will be tons of different things in there as well. So we've got many different species growing. They're well established. You've got nothing new. If you knock down a tree, that's fine, because actually you've got others, and it means that other species below it will grow. It's not the same as something like grass, where if you can think, you might have a grass field and it's got a couple of daisies and a few dandelions, but if you knock out the grass, like if the grass gets like a fungal infection and it all dies out, or there's a really wet season and it can't grow, then there'll be nothing growing in that field at all, and that will affect the whole ecosystem. So something like a stable community, there are other things that, other plants and other sources of food within it. So when you have a look at the actual definition that I'm putting here, I think it's a bit complex. A stable community is one in which the size of the populations of all species remains relatively constant over time. So I'm just going to circle like the key bits that you need to remember. Size of the populations. So what we're talking about there, we were saying that the populations was species, like the example given was like 7 fish, right? So if we're talking about the number of trees, again, relatively constant. You might have one full, but that's fine. Others, and like another will grow back. You could be talking about foxes, and actually the numbers might drop slightly in the winter when it's really cold, but again, the numbers will go back up to like regular population size. You don't have like a huge wipeout of things. The next thing, all species remain like relatively constant over time, and this is kind of going into what I said there, the fact that you have these natural fluctuations where maybe you've got a species migrating, or in an area you could have some hibernating, but actually over time it's going to be relatively constant. So the size of the population, which means like the number of individuals within each population, is the same, and it's constant over time. So you might have changes here or there, but you're not going to have any like massive movement or change. So the two things, size of population, so just think about those like 7 fish, and constant over time. So there's very little huge disruption where you'll have like oak trees and then they totally disappear kind of thing. Okay, right. I'm just going to compare back to the booklet that I made a while back. So this is where we talk about living and non-living as well. It's going to come up in a second in the textbook. You need to know the terms biotic and abiotic. I always think just biotic, biology, right? And then abiotic, like non-living. So if something is a biotic factor, it's a living factor. One of the things that people always forget with a living factor is bacteria, and like let's say you've got a fungal infection of a plant or whatever, those will come under biotic factors because they are living. So non-communicable diseases like obesity, not a living factor. Something like, I don't know, blindness, it's not something that you can catch, it's not transferable. A communicable disease that you can catch, like a bacterial infection, all of those are caused by bacteria, so they are a living factor. The next thing that we've got, abiotic, there is so much that comes under this, and these two really will come up. Oh, sorry, cat, of course. Go away. These two will come up mainly when you're talking about your control variables. So if you're doing an experiment and you have to have a look at like light levels, like we did with the pondweed, the pondweed is your living factor. When we're talking about abiotic factors that you would control in that experiment, if you are only changing the distance of the light, you have to keep the amount of carbon dioxide in the water the same. You have to keep the volume of water the same. You have to keep the wattage of the light, or the light bulb, the same that you're using, because all we're changing is the distance. Another abiotic factor you can always go back to is temperature, unless you know that's the thing you're changing. Biotic factors, you want to use either the same plant, pondweed, or you could say you want to use the same species, the same age of pondweed, you want there to be the same mass, or you could use like the same number of leaves on it. The next word here, interdependence, I already told you guys, that is where organisms rely on one another. So you can see there's a couple of examples that I've given here. For plants, they look pretty, they smell pretty, they're really brightly coloured, purely because they want to attract insects. Could be people, could be insects. They want to have something come over towards them. So For a bee, what they're getting from this relationship is nectar from the plant, and they're going to eat that, and eventually they'll produce honey for the plant. They want the bees to come over, so they produce this nectar so that their pollen, which is the main sex cell, will transfer to these insects, which will then go and pollinate another plant, and that will, increase this plant's ability to fertilize other ones, basically, so it can grow seeds. What we've got over here, this is a type of, I don't know, crocodile, alligator. I want to say alligator, but it doesn't matter. Whatever. This guy over here, you can see there's a bird. It would be really, really simple, really easy for that to snap shut and to get a meal. But these alligators never do. They just allow the birds to clean their teeth. So for the bird, the benefit it's getting is food. It will eat fresh meat from whatever is stuck around in the jaws of this organism. For this guy, he doesn't get toothache, so an infected tooth could actually kill an animal when they don't have antibiotics, obviously. So for this guy, he's got a benefit there, and both of them are benefiting from this relationship. If you think about berries and things like strawberries, blackberries, all of those, they, again, smell nice, look nice. The whole point of them is that they want to be eaten. The plant uses a huge amount of energy creating these, or growing these things, making them smell delicious and look pretty, because they want something to come over and eat them. For a bird, it's benefiting because it's getting a meal. For the plant, it wants to be eaten by this. The bird will then fly away, poo out the seed somewhere else, and then those new baby plants can grow without competition anywhere. Okay. This is, I don't know, do we talk about it now? I'm going to talk about it now anyway. Bit of a weird one, right? There are different types of competition between organisms. Are we coming on to competition now? If I just go on to the next page, kind of, there we go. You can see abiotic and biotic factors. We've talked about those. Hopefully you guys get it. I'll probably, no, I'll go on to this one. No, I'll go back here. Right. There are two terms. One is inter, one is intra. The way that I think about it, if you think inter, it's spelt with an ER, so that reminds me of different, right? So if I go on to this one, we've got inter-specific, so different. And then we've got a different word here, intra. That's got an A in it. Think about same, that has obviously a letter A. Intra-specific and inter-specific. These terms are used when we're talking about competition. Oh, not chemistry. Right, here we go. When we talk about competition. So if you've got I don't know, what are we going for? 2 lions fighting. Okay, so if you've got 2 lions fighting, they could be fighting for a mate, they could be fighting for prey, they could be fighting for who's the dominant member of the pack, whatever. This is an example of intra-specific because they are the same species. So intra-specific competition is where members of the same species fight. And it's not a nice thought, but we are all in competition with one another. You're going to be fighting whether you know it or not, with the people in your class for GCSE grades, for A-level places or college places. You're then going to fight for job spaces or university places. You're going to compete with these people for houses. You will compete for mates, whether you know it or not. You're probably going to compete against other human beings for bargains in the supermarket, all of that, right? And all of that is an example of intra-specific because we are the same species. If we have a look at 2 different species, 2 different. So different is where we talk about interspecific. Whoa. 2 different species is what I meant, not just fighting. Here we go. So you can see aggressive. Oh my days, no, I want the monkey. A monkey. Oh, has someone made, no? I think that looks mocked up. No, that's not real. I mean, that bit, maybe that's not. Anyway, you've got 2 different species here. So monkey versus a snake here. That looks real to me. You've got a hippo and a lion. Over here, we've got a lion and a jaguar, I don't know, a leopard, sorry, fighting over some kind of an impala. It's like a type of deer. So because these are different species, this is where we spell it with an ER, different, interspecific. When it's the same, it's intra. Okay, going back to the textbook, if I can find it, this is again just talking about different things that, species compete for, and they've got all weird and wonderful ways that they can adapt. This guy over here is a prime example. You will have seen about it. This is called a pitcher plant. So the pitcher plant is kind of thought of as carnivorous. So people always think about Venus flytraps, right? They don't actually eat plants, insects, because they don't have like teeth in a stomach. But what will happen is, they've got these sensitive hairs inside the body of the plant. When they feel movement, they close, and they will slowly release enzymes onto the organism that's trapped, which will then destroy it. It will essentially melt its body from the outside in. Think about it like that. It's grim, absolutely disgusting. So it will start digesting that animal. That will turn the insoluble food molecules into soluble particles. So we're talking about, let's say it's a fly, that will go from proteins into the fly, will start breaking down to amino acids when it's still in here. Those will then be absorbed from high to low concentration by diffusion into the organism. These guys grow where it's not really mineral rich soil. So normally plants get their minerals obviously from the ground. These guys can't, so they make up for that in this elaborate way. These kinds of pitcher plants do a similar thing. You might have seen them before on telly. Oh, a little frog in there. He's going to be able to jump out. Fine. What they do is they are quite brightly coloured. They smell nice and sweet. They've got inside them a liquid. Bugs will come over because they want to try and eat that liquid. They will go down into the plant. Once they are in there, look, you can see there, that one over there or over here. Once they go in there, they will either drown. Some of them are able to close their lids on the top so that the organism can't get out, and then again it will just be, no babe, not right now, it will just, I don't need to hear it right now, sweetheart. We've got these being digested again in exactly the same way, so it goes from insoluble to soluble. Moving over, this one I've done in a different video. Okay, start again. Competition in animals. Birds have really, really, really weird mating dances and rituals to attract a mate. Have a Google of it. Bizarre. Also, watching animals get aggressive over their territory. You'll know if you've got a dog. If anyone comes to the house, they can get really funny. Some of them become really aggressive. What makes a successful competitor in biology? It's anything that basically can survive long enough that it reproduces, and then it can pass on its genes. So if it doesn't have enough food, it will die. If it doesn't have territory, it will not be safe, it will die. If it can't find a mate, it's going to die. So a successful competitor is the one that has the genes, which obviously ties in with DNA topic, that make it the biggest and the best or the strongest, whatever, for the environment. So it's the best adapted to where it is meant to live. So what I was saying is this required practical comes up. Obviously, that's a huge one. Everyone gets asked about it. So it's for combined and separate, or triple and trilogy. But I've done that in another video, so we're going to ignore that for now. Competition in plants as well, I'm going to discuss. So when I go back over to this guy, adaptation and competition in animals, what I want to highlight is these three things that you need to be aware of. So not all right, of course. Structural adaptations, behavioural adaptations, and functional adaptations. Okay, so this could apply to plants as well. Absolutely. Mostly animals when they're talking about it, because plants and behaviour don't really go hand in hand, but there would be some examples, I'm sure. So structural adaptations, an example of that is something like a snail. And it's got a shell on the outside of its body for protection, and that's called an exoskeleton. Equally, you've got crabs, they've got the shell on the outside rather than bones inside. That is a method of protection, so that's a structural adaptation. We could have something like pincers, or you've got horns on deers. Structural adaptations are like physical features that protect the organism or allow it to adapt to its environment. So something like a camel having long eyelashes, right? They've got really, really long eyelashes to keep sand out. It's not really going to kill it. So it's not exactly but you see what I'm saying? It will just protect it in the environment where it lives. So it's a benefit to the organism. So it's any physical features. Behavioural adaptations are something that organisms choose to do. So by that, you've got animals in the desert that choice in behavior, whatever, you see what I'm saying. So that could be like staying underground when it's sunny outside. So when there's, during the desert, in the heat of the day, organisms go underground to shade. Behavioral adaptations are things like some birds live primarily on the ground. Birds of the same species might only live in the trees. You might have some frogs living on one end of the pond, others will live on the other end, and over time they can then develop into a whole different species if those individuals don't come back together within their population and mate. Functional adaptations are kind of changes to their metabolism. I can't spell adaptations. Right, okay, there we go. These could be things like, if you can imagine, humans can go 3 days without drinking water and then they wouldn't survive, so I'm told. I'm sure there'll be some who are like slightly over, slightly under that, fine. For something like a bear, it can hibernate for like 3-4 months. They go all that time without water and without food. That's not something that organisms can naturally do. That's not a choice. You can't decide to go to sleep for 4 months and then be okay, right? So these are adaptations where its metabolism must slow down and the chemical processes in its body have to slow down. Another example of a functional adaptation is there are some kind of fish and frogs as well, and when it gets really, really cold and the water around them is freezing, obviously their blood is mostly made up of water, so they will start producing antifreeze proteins like you put in the water in your car to stop their blood from freezing. That then means that they can survive in those environments where the water around them is literally freezing and they will still survive. So I put a couple of examples here. These are foxes. They will have come from like a similar ancestor, but you can see one of them obviously lives in the snow, one of them lives in the desert, and they've got really different features according to where they are. So they have adapted in different ways. So you can see here, if they've got really like long ears, long limbs, long snout, that is all to increase the surface area so that heat can radiate off their bodies. So if you think about your physics, right? We want as many different surfaces in contact with the external environment as possible so that heat can radiate off. They've got a thin layer of fur. It doesn't look particularly fluffy. They are camouflage, and camouflage comes up all the time. That's like a physical or structural adaptation. They are camouflaged to their environment so that they can't be seen either by hunters or by their prey. So if they want to come and eat their prey, they will have really muscular legs for running, because their prey doesn't stand still. So what I mean by that, these guys are carnivores, so they're going to need to run after their prey. They will have lots of muscle in their legs and have loads of mitochondria, so that's a really quick release of energy. Something like a plant eater, right, doesn't need to chase its food. Cows don't need to be able to run very fast, or they can, just grab it from the ground. The next thing, obviously, we're talking about like claws and teeth. They are shaped in it, they're sharp, they're pointy, so that they can grab onto things, so their prey can't get away, and also so that they can kill them and tear the meat. They've also got claws, and that's for helping catch their prey, but also it will help them to dig in their environments. This guy adapted in a totally different way. It's white so that it's camouflaged to its environment. The last thing it wants to do is allow heat to radiate off because it's so cold where it lives. So you can see over here, they've got really short stubby ears, realistically, compared to this one. These are so that we reduce the amount of heat that radiates off their body. Again, they've got really, really thick fur. That's as an insulating layer. Okay, what I want to remind you of here is surface area to volume ratio. Okay, so this is a bit of a confusing concept in my mind. This organism, right, this is a walrus. It is big. It's like a thumb, isn't it? Yeah, a thumb with little spikes out of its body. These are called tusks. This came up in like an end of topic test. They're not teeth, they're tusks. And really, really annoyingly, a lot of people will write that that helps them to eat because we think, right, it's from its mouth, that's teeth. These are not there for eating. They'd actually get in the way. Like, I can't think of anything more annoying. Not right now, babe. Not right now. So these are the two things that they do with these. One is fighting. The second is like climbing in and out on the ice. So they can use them to dig into the ice. Next thing, like I said, is for fighting or like dominance. They don't have ears, right? You can't see flaps for ears. They do, there'll be holes in their body, but they don't have what, like the pinna, which is the outside part of the ear. They have no, they don't actually really have fur. They've just got huge amounts of blubber. My separate science group told me that they've got really thick skin. I googled it. It's up to 4 centimeters thick, their skin, right? So well done, you guys, did not know that. That's incredibly thick. They're dark in color, so they want to absorb as many rays of light from the electromagnetic spectrum as possible, so visible light. So all of those things make them, you know, better adapted to where they live. This organism, on the other hand, it won't be storing lots of fat because it doesn't want to, it doesn't need to, it's living in a hot environment. It's created a large surface area by having these, you know, ears that are huge. It will have a long tail. It's got really long feet. It's got fur in case it needs to be any warmer. It looks like it lives in a desert because of this sandy colour, but at night it can get quite cold. So those are some of their adaptations. When we talk about their surface area, this one obviously covers a huge surface area, right? Because it could have little ears, it doesn't, they're massive. This one doesn't have many adaptations to make it larger, to cover a larger surface area. When we think about volume, the volume of this is huge. I don't know how much they weigh, but it's going to be a lot. I'm hoping bigger than me, maybe a couple of me, right? Over here, this guy is tiny. When we think about their surface area to volume ratio, and that is like a ratio, it's a playoff between how much of them is in contact with the outside world, essentially, and that's its surface area, versus the volume, how much of them there is in like internally. So I think it's a horse that's got small intestines alone that are like 12 meters long, right? So you've got a horse, but that covers a huge distance. So the horse might not look massive, particularly like in comparison to something like that or an elephant, but actually its internal structures are huge, absolutely huge. So when we talk about surface area to volume ratio, this is a huge adaptation when it comes to living in hot or cold climates. If you are living in a cold climate, you want to cover a large surface area. So you want to have adaptations that allow heat to radiate off. This guy obviously has a large volume because it stores fat. But when we are talking individually about surface area to volume ratio, okay, this guy has a smaller surface area compared to its volume. So there's not much of it in contact with the outside world, given how massive it is. This guy has a really tiny volume, but its surface area is huge. So we say that it's got a really large surface area to volume ratio. And the way that I always think about this is if you think about melting butter in a frying pan, right? If you put in a massive block, oh my God, worst butter and frying pan ever. Don't judge me on this. If you put a huge block of butter into a frying pan, that's going to take forever to melt, isn't it? Even if the frying pan's hot. If you break this down into smaller pieces, you chop it up, you know that that's going to take way shorter amount of time to melt. That's this guy, this walking, moving thumb, right? That's going to take forever. More of that is in contact with the outside, given its volume. So if it's got a high surface area to volume ratio, it's better adapted to warm environments. If it has a really low surface area to volume ratio, it's going to mean that it's better able to survive in cold environments, okay? So moving on, we get it. Another adaptation that I want to talk to you about, I'll come on to these in a sec. Camels, right? So a camel is what we call an extremophile. Phile means love. Extreme is, you know, like far end of the spectrum. So what I mean by that is They live in a hot desert. That makes them an extremophile. Not a huge amount of things can live there. Penguins, like the walrus that we saw earlier, polar bears, again, they're extremophiles because not a lot of organisms can live there. For these guys, they've got a fat store. And the majority of people will say that the fat store is there because they live in the desert and they can go a long time without eating. Partially true, but that's not why they have a fat store. The reason that they have a fat store, and this has been like linked to really, really challenging questions. If you think about the respiration equation, you've got glucose coming in, we've got oxygen, glucose plus oxygen goes to carbon dioxide, water, and obviously it releases energy. Water. Things going in are our reactants, things coming out are our products. Fat is a reactant. You can break that down by respiration, and what releases is water. The camel can go ages without eating, right? Like absolute ages, like weeks, I think. It cannot go without water. As I said to you, with humans, it's like 3 days. So this will respire and break down into water for the camel, so that is one of its adaptations. I'll come on to plants in a second. I'm just trying to think of, another extremophile, like I said, like the fish that can survive in like minus 10 degrees and they don't freeze because of the antifreeze. You've got certain bacteria that live literally around like volcanoes and cracks in the ocean, you know what I'm talking about, but air vents, where huge amounts of pressure and high temperature gas will be released. They can live around there because they're surviving at hugely hot temperatures, and that is because they are extremophiles. They have enzymes that will not denature until they're like a lot hotter. Then we come on to some of these terms. You need to know them in more detail if you're doing separate. Predator is any animal, and it has to be an animal. You don't get a plant that's a predator that eats another animal, so it's a carnivore. If something is a vegetarian, you don't say it's a predator. So my rabbit eats grass and different plants. It's not a predator because we can't say that it predates on plants. So it has to be a carnivore. It's adapted because we said it's got sharp teeth, it's got like long, strong legs, etc. A prey, it could be a carnivore. So if you've got something like a bird, that will eat a caterpillar, right? So it is a predator, but a cat might eat that. So the bird, although it is also a predator by eating the caterpillar, could also be a prey. So it's something that is eaten by another animal. And it has to be animal because, like we said, you can't have a lettuce that is something's prey. Herbivore is something that only eats plants, so like your vegans out there or vegetarians. Carnivores only eat meat. And then we've got omnivores, and that's what the majority of humans are. They eat both plants and animals. And actually a lot of organisms as well are omnivores. Hedgehog comes to mind, but actually there's quite a few. Cats will also eat grass to help with their digestive system. Nocturnal, if you see this word come up, nocturnal is something that's awake at night. So it could be your hamster. Nocturnal hunter, not really our hamster. What we're talking about is things like badgers and foxes. They are awake at night, and that's when they will hunt. They will sleep in the day, and that's kind of for protection. Okay, so coming down to this next part, adaptation and competition in plants. The main things that they compete for, it's not the same obviously as animals. A massive one is space, right? So there are examples in nature, and this is grim, where trees release toxins in their roots to destroy any of their own seeds that are trying to grow, right? So release stuff into the soil, nothing can then grow. And it's because it wants to reduce or avoid competition. If a baby seed starts establishing there and germinating, also known as growing, that will then cause competition between, intra-specific competition between the babies, and it doesn't want that. So for plants, first thing, obviously, mainly they're competing for is light levels. And they do that in a whole different series of ways. Some organisms that are below trees, so if you've got trees in the forest, right, the things that grow below it actually have really large leaves. So, hopefully you'll see something like stinging nettles. If you remember, they grow really low down. They've actually got really big leaves for like low growing, not even bushes. Do you see what I'm saying? Any other like plant that grows quite low to the ground like that normally have like smaller leaves. They always grow underneath trees, underneath hedgerows. They are adapted not to have huge light levels by having like a larger surface area as possible, so that any light that is coming through they're able to take in. Next one, oh actually I'm going to say it now because otherwise I'll forget, right? Bluebells come up quite regularly. So bluebells, whenever you think about bluebells, I always think either side of the road, but mostly in a forest, right? We know spring is coming because the first organisms that come out are things like, are they called crocuses? Yeah, the little yellow ones. There's snowdrops, those the white ones, and bluebells. They come out and then everything else will start to follow. The reason that we know that means spring's coming, these plants flower, like bloom, earlier than other organisms because they will flower like their season is before the tree's leaves. So what that means, they get as much light as possible, so their season is a lot earlier than the trees, so that they can get as much sunlight as possible, they can grow, they can reproduce before they get the competition from the trees. Water, there are a number of ways that things are adapted to get water. They get them from their roots, and that's a mistake that people always make. They always talk about them taking water in from their leaves. Plants don't, it's always from their roots. When you've got plants in a desert, there are two different types of root systems that are around. Some cacti, right, have really shallow roots. That means as soon as the rain falls, they can take it up straight away. They will grow next to other cacti, right, who have really deep I can't draw like this, again, don't judge, that go really, really deep underground to underground sources. The reason that these are able to survive together, so again, you'll have pools of water underground. This reduces the competition. They're not directly competing against one another. There's very, very limited water there, but whatever just falls, those will get. Anything underground or stored that manages to trickle through, this plant will then get. Nutrients, we've already said that how some of them are able to compete. That's by having, a way to digest like bugs, which is pretty grim. For the rest of them, again, a really good root system, having large surface area, those root hair cells, which are specialised cells that you met in at the start of GCSE, that will allow it to take up loads of minerals by diffusion. Space to grow. So this is a huge one. Wherever they grow, they're stuck there. It's not like they can move to somewhere warmer or somewhere with more sunlight. So plants really need to seriously consider where they are growing, right? So when I show you these are all methods that plants have used to allow their seeds to spread, so that they're not competing against one another, and so that their offspring have the best chance of survival. This over here is strawberry. We said before, plants put a huge amount of energy into making that taste sweet. So that a huge amount of its sugar, rather than growing into like taller or more leaves, it puts it into producing these. They taste amazing, smell amazing, and look really bright and vibrant. They want an organism to come and eat them, move away, poo them out, so that they're not competing against the mother plant. So that is that adaptation. This one, sycamore, it is an example of like a wind. It uses wind, to cause its seeds to spread. So this is relying on the wind. Downside of that is that you might have a really, a season where there's not much wind. Equally, you could have birds die out or shot in an area, and they're not going to come and eat these. So with any of these, there are pros and cons. This one relies on wind catching it. I say no wind. There's always wind, right? Maybe, let's say, you've got a sycamore tree, but someone's built a house next to it. There's going to be a low amount of wind. So this will catch the wind. It's got a large surface area, and it will cause it to move to a different location. These are amazing. You'll know if you've ever pulled them out of your dog or your cat. It's called burdock. These are the things that inspired the production of Velcro with its tiny little hooks. They've got little hooks that will catch onto the fur or clothes of humans or animals. They will transfer the seeds elsewhere, drop off, and then it will start to grow. This method, a bit weird, it's explosion. So these are really sensitive to touch. If water drops on it, or a plant or an insect will drop on them, they explode and the seeds go flinging, right? Meters, don't know what the personal best is, right? But they'll go really fast, so they're not in competition with the main mother plant. This one here, this is a coconut. They've got loads of fat in them, as you know, and they've done that from products of photosynthesis. They produce lipids. Fat floats in water. So you will always find palm trees along the beach, right? They drop off their coconuts, they land in the water will carry them further down along the shore, and then that will start growing. And again, that's to make sure that none of these are in direct competition with the mother plant. I then want to show you these. This comes up more at A level, to be honest, but water lilies, they're really odd, okay? So why I say they're really odd, they don't grow under the water like pondweed. They don't grow on the land like other plants. They're between the two, so that makes them really well adapted. So other plants, if you overwater them, they die because they can't take in minerals. These guys are able to do a bit of both. So they're at the top of the surface where they can get the most sunlight possible. They don't have a lot of competition. It'll only be competing against things from, you know, for light levels from outside. The way that they are able to float or be buoyant is they've got loads of, if you remember, you've got the different layers, and this layer is the spongy mesophyll, and it's got air spaces where carbon dioxide goes in and sunlight and oxygen comes out. This layer is huge. It's got a really large surface area. It keeps loads of air in there, and that's to trap the air, make it buoyant. Okay, this one over here, this is called marram grass. Marram grass, if you've ever been to Camber Sands, you'll see it growing. This is what it looks like down a microscope if you have a look at a cross section. And marram grass is not able to live in many places, not able to live in different habitats, sorry. It can live in one on the sand. So this is primarily where it lives, and it's amazing at doing that because there's so little competition. So if you see these sand dunes, right, you've got loads of salt in the air, so that makes it really hard for plants to grow. There is tons of wind because it's off the coast, so obviously wind can, like a mass, mount up as it goes across the ocean. It has got like little fresh water other than a bit of rain, because obviously a lot of it has, again, the salt in it. So the biggest issue is that for plants, they can't establish their roots. So when they start growing, sand moves a lot. So these will start, and that's how you get these like mounds or sand dunes. This sand around it will stabilize. So if you have a look at this cross section, creepy, it's got loads of like little internal hairs. They look like they're really tiny surface area, thin spikes, but then actually not. When I go back over to this image that I put into your books, they're actually curved. So by doing this, it reduces the surface area. So this part of the leaf is just all like curved around in there. You can see that's where like air can come in and out. Once you get in here, it's stomata, which, if you remember, we've got the guard cells that open and close to allow carbon dioxide in, and it will allow water and oxygen out. The stomata are hidden in these sunken pits. It's got these hairs around it as well. All of this, the fact that it's shaped in this way, the sunken pits, the hairs, what you want to do, because there's so much salt in the air, it's got a really, really low concentration of water. Whereas the plant obviously has water inside of it, it will lose water by transpiration. So water will move out by transpiration, but we don't want to lose huge amounts of water. So by having all of these like internal structures, it will be able to trap moisture that increases the concentration of water inside the marram grass, which means there's less of a concentration gradient from outside inside the plant compared to outside. So let's say the plant has is 60% water. If it traps enough water in here, that will also be 60% water, because it's not being blown away by the breeze. It's not surrounded by the salt in the environment outside. There will be no more water lost from high to low concentration. So that then means that the plant is able to survive. So that's like a really good example where it is really well adapted. Another extremophile, so that I believe would be counted as an extremophile. Another example is really cool. It's called mangrove. So mangrove plants are these guys. Again, a bit like the water lilies, they're growing inside and outside of the water. So these are around salt water and their roots are inside. They don't have a huge amount of competition. The way that they are able to